What if Meghan Markle woke up tomorrow and decided she wanted back in? Not a visit, not a one-off appearance at a funeral or a jubilee. A real return, a working role, a title with teeth, a seat at the table of the institution she and Harry walked away from in 2020. It's a question royal watchers ask constantly, usually in whispers, sometimes in headlines. So let's actually answer it, not with rumour, not with leaked documents or anonymous sources, with the real rules, the ones written into the fabric of the British monarchy, and what they would actually allow, and what they would never allow, no matter how badly anyone wanted it. Because the answer is far stranger and far more restrictive than most people assume. Stay with us, because by the end of this you'll understand exactly why a full royal return is nearly impossible, and exactly what a partial one might look like. Before we go further, hit subscribe, because we're about to walk through the actual mechanics of royal power that almost nobody explains properly. Let's start with the foundation everyone gets wrong. People assume royal status is like a job. You resign, and later, if the company wants you back, you reapply. That is not how the monarchy works. When Harry and Meghan stepped back in January 2020, what actually happened was a negotiated settlement, formalized months later, that stripped their status as working royals. That term matters enormously. It refers to family members who carry out official public duties on behalf of the Crown, funded in part by the sovereign grant, and who in return are barred from significant independent commercial activity. Harry and Meghan gave up the funding and the formal duties. In exchange, they kept their titles, Duke and Duchess of Sussex, but lost their military patronages and royal patronages, which King Charles formally confirmed would not be reinstated. So here's the first constitutional wall a return would hit. Reactivating working royal status isn't something a person requests and receives like a favour. It requires the monarch's direct approval, agreement from the household machinery that manages diaries, security, and public appearances, and critically, buy-in from the family members whose own roles would be affected by reintroducing a new working member into the rotation. That's not one gatekeeper. That's several, and they don't always agree with each other. Now let's go back to the actual document that created this situation, because most people have never really looked at what the 2020 arrangement said. It wasn't just a press release. It was a structured framework, agreed between the Sussexes and the palace, that spelled out specific conditions: no use of Royal Highness titles in an official commercial capacity, no expectation of public funding for their household, and a formal review period originally set at 12 months to assess how the new arrangement was functioning. That review happened in early 2021, and the outcome was that the changes became permanent rather than reverting. That detail matters because it tells you this wasn't framed by the palace as some open-ended trial. It was framed, at least from the institutional side, as a lasting reset, one Buckingham Palace has shown little public appetite to revisit since. Let's talk about what actually stands in the way if a full return were ever formally requested. The first and most immediate obstacle is money. Working royals do not simply show up to cut ribbons for free. Their public duties are supported financially, historically through a combination of the sovereign grant and the Duchy of Cornwall or Duchy of Lancaster income, depending on which royals we're discussing. But Harry and Meghan's post-2020 life has been explicitly built on independent commercial income, Netflix deals, Spotify ventures, book publishing, brand partnerships, and Meghan's own lifestyle ventures. Reinstating official royal status would require untangling all of that, because working royals are constitutionally barred from exactly the kind of independent commercial activity that has defined the Sussexes' finances for the past several years. Would Meghan give up commercial ventures to requalify? Would the palace even accept a partial arrangement, some hybrid status that hasn't really existed before in modern royal history? That single financial contradiction alone makes a full return look almost impossible under current rules, and that's before we even get to security. Let's talk about security, because this is where things get genuinely complicated and where the theoretical question stops being abstract and becomes a real legal battlefield. Royal protection in the UK is overseen by RaVP, the Royalty and VIP Executive Committee, which makes independent assessments based on threat level, role, and public duties. When Harry and Meghan stepped back, their automatic taxpayer-funded UK police protection ended, which is part of what triggered Harry's well-documented legal battle over security arrangements, a case that has wound through the UK courts for years. For any full working royal return, the security question would have to be resolved from scratch. Automatic protection isn't handed out based on bloodline alone, it is based on assessed risk and active role. Reactivating that machinery isn't a phone call. It's a formal reassessment, potentially further legal proceedings, and a financial commitment that would need sign-off from the Home Office, not just the palace. So even if the King personally wanted Meghan back in some capacity, the security infrastructure required to support that return doesn't answer to him alone. It answers to a government body with its own independent criteria. Now here's where it gets interesting, because a full return isn't the only theoretical scenario worth exploring. What about a partial one? Could Meghan return for something narrower, a single high-profile role, a specific charitable patronage, some limited public capacity without reactivating full working royal status? In theory, yes, something like that has more precedent than people think. Royal family members sometimes take on specific projects without holding the full weight of working royal designation. But, and this is critical, anything resembling authority tied to Catherine's role or William's household or anything touching succession-adjacent responsibilities would face an entirely different and far steeper threshold. Why? Because those roles aren't just ceremonial. They're tied to precedence, the formal system determining where each royal stands and how they're ranked at public and state occasions. Precedence isn't casually reassigned. It's governed by centuries of protocol and, in modern practice, confirmed through letters patent and established convention. You don't borrow someone else's precedence. You don't casually redistribute duties tied to the heir's household. That's not how any of this functions, no matter how the idea might be framed publicly. It's worth pausing here to look at historical precedent because the monarchy has actually seen partial reintegrations before, just not in quite this form. The Duke of Windsor, formerly Edward VIII, remained a member of the extended royal family after his abdication, retained a title, but was never again given constitutional authority or public duties in any meaningful sense, a permanent, deliberately limited arrangement. Princess Margaret's household adjustments over the decades, and even the way Prince Andrew's public role was gradually and then abruptly wound down following his own controversies, show that the institution does have mechanisms for adjusting a royal status. What it has never really done in modern history is reverse a formal stepping back and restore full active duties to the same level as before. That's the precedent gap Meghan's hypothetical return would be facing, not just internal resistance, but an absence of any real modern template for how such a reversal would even work procedurally. So let's ask the harder question, what would the family dynamics actually look like if this hypothetical request were ever seriously raised? Start with Charles. The king has spent his reign trying to balance two competing instincts, visible affection for his younger son and an unwavering commitment to what royal insiders have called a slimmed-down monarchy, a phrase Charles has used for years to describe his preference for a smaller, more focused, more publicly defensible institution. Every credible report from royal correspondents over recent years has suggested the same through line: reconciliation with Harry personally, yes, potentially. Reinstatement to official royal duties, no. Those two things are not the same conversation, and conflating them is where a lot of tabloid speculation goes wrong. Then there's William. As heir, William's household increasingly operates as its own center of gravity within the institution, with its own priorities, its own long-term planning around the future of the monarchy, and understandably, a protective instinct around Catherine's role and recovery following her documented 2024 health journey. Any hypothetical reactivation involving Meghan stepping into duties even loosely adjacent to Catherine's sphere would almost certainly face resistance from William's household specifically, not because of personal animosity necessarily, but because of institutional turf. The Prince and Princess of Wales are building toward their own future reign, and that future is being carefully, deliberately shaped right now, with very little apparent appetite for reopening settled arrangements. And what about Catherine herself? Publicly, the Princess of Wales has said almost nothing about the Sussexes since 2020, a silence that royal commentators have widely interpreted as deliberate discipline, not indifference. If we're speculating about a hypothetical scenario where any restructuring of duties touched her household, it's reasonable to assume, based on everything reported about how protective William and the Wales household have become since her illness, that any perceived overlap would be handled with extreme caution, if it were entertained at all. This is speculation, to be clear. There is no indication this scenario has ever actually been proposed. But it's worth understanding why, structurally, it would be almost immediately complicated, even as a hypothetical. Now let's zoom out to public opinion, because that's the piece that would ultimately shape whether any of this could even survive politically, if not constitutionally. Polling on Meghan's popularity in the UK has remained consistently lower than most senior royals since 2020, a gap that hasn't meaningfully closed. A monarchy that increasingly justifies its public funding through demonstrated public support would have to weigh whether reintroducing Meghan into official duties strengthens or weakens that case. Royal finance isn't just about internal family politics, it's about public consent filtered through the sovereign grant, parliamentary scrutiny, and ultimately, the ongoing question of whether the institution justifies its cost to taxpayers. Any hypothetical reintroduction would have to be weighed against that backdrop, and by most public reporting, that backdrop currently leans firmly against it. So where does that leave us? If we walk through this honestly, no leaked documents, no invented confrontations, Just the actual mechanics, a full working royal return for Meghan would require untangling years of independent commercial ventures, triggering a fresh and legally complicated security reassessment, securing approval from multiple overlapping power centers within the family who don't necessarily share the same incentives, surviving a public opinion climate that currently offers little political cover for the move, and doing all of this without a modern precedent showing it's ever actually been done before. Every one of those obstacles is real, none of them are rumors, and collectively they explain why, no matter how many tabloid headlines speculate about a secret return, the structural reality makes it enormously difficult to imagine happening in any full sense. Does that mean nothing ever changes? Not necessarily. Royal history has surprised people before, reconciliations happen, and institutions evolve slowly, sometimes in ways almost nobody predicts a decade out. But evolve is the key word. Any realistic path back for Meghan, if one ever exists, would likely be narrow, incremental, carefully negotiated, and almost certainly nothing like the sweeping reinstatement some corners of the internet love to imagine. The system wasn't built to be reopened casually, and everything we've just walked through explains exactly why. So here's the real takeaway. The monarchy isn't a job you can simply walk back into. It's a lattice of financial rules, security protocols, family power dynamics, historical precedent, and public accountability, all reinforcing each other. Pull on one thread and you're immediately tangled in the rest. That's not palace secrecy, that's just how the machine is built. What do you think? Is there any realistic version of this where Meghan and Harry step back into official duties, or has that door closed for good? Let us know in the comments. And if this kind of deep dive into how the monarchy actually works is what you're here for, we've got another video breaking down exactly what happens to royal titles when the crown eventually passes to William, and it might surprise you how much is still undecided. This is Royal Pulse, where whispers around the crown come to light.